So, when I ask, what is Odoo? What comes to mind? Well, Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a suite of business management software that some people say is like fertilizer because of the way it promotes growth. But some people also say Odoo is like a magic beanstalk because it grows with your company and is also magically affordable. But then again, you could look at Odoo in terms of how its individual software programs are a lot like building blocks. I mean, whatever your business needs, manufacturing, accounting, HR programs, you can build a custom software suite that's perfect for your company. So what is Odoo? Well, I guess Odoo is a bit of everything. Odoo is a fertilizer, magic beanstalk building blocks for business. Yeah, that's it. Which means that Odoo is exactly what every business needs. Learn more and sign up now at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for episode 33 of The Murder in My Family. Today's episode was supposed to air last week, but I was sick and lost my voice and wasn't able to record. I'm still not 100%, but I'm ready to give it a go. And this episode gets us back on schedule. And speaking of schedules, in order to keep bringing you fresh cases on a regular basis, I've decided to start airing new episodes of The Murder in My Family every other week. I'm a one-man operation, and it's quite time-consuming to produce this podcast between writing, research, recording, editing, and conducting interviews. On top of all that, I've been inundated with requests from people to cover their loved one's case. And since I never want to turn someone away if I can help, organizing and responding to all of those requests has become a job of its own. So expect episode 34 to be released 2 weeks after this episode. If you find that you enjoy this podcast, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts, so that the show can continue to grow and reach new listeners. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support the show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you could do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. Thank you to all the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. Just a reminder that 2 days after this episode releases, I'll be at the ISOC convention in Albany, New York. That's the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases convention. It should be a fun time with guests like Dr. Henry Lee and Sarah Wecht, and there will be people there connected to and discussing the Ted Bundy and Charles Manson cases, as well as the cases of D.B. Cooper and Amelia Earhart. And of course, there will also be some other podcasters there too, Tim and Lance from Crawl Space and Missing Maura Murray, and John Lorden from Brain Scratch. I hope to see some of you there. But if I don't see you there, I hope I'll see you at CrimeCon in New Orleans this June 7th through 9th on Podcast Row. If you haven't signed up for CrimeCon, time is running out. If you want to register and save 10% on your standard badges, visit crimecon.com and use my promo code Criminology19 to get your discount. And the next 3 people that use that promo code will get a package with some podcast merch inside, which includes coffee mugs, stickers, copies of my books, and more. And I'll deliver them to you in person at CrimeCon. So be sure to take advantage of that offer. Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's start today's episode. Roger Atkison was born on May 30th, 1948, in St. Joseph, Missouri. After graduating high school, He served his country proudly in the Navy during the Vietnam War. In 1973, he married his high school sweetheart, Marcella Hatcher. They were happy, and they seemed to be the perfect couple, as Roger and Marcella shared a strong belief in their faith, but still managed to mix in fun when they were together. Before they got married, Roger and Rose would go out on dates riding a 2-seated bicycle all over town. The couple made their home in St. Joseph, and Roger got a job as a telephone installer and repairman in nearby Savannah, Missouri, working for General Telephone Electronics Corporation, or GTE. By 1980, the future looked bright for the young couple, but not everything was as it seemed. Despite being a good provider and a seemingly responsible husband, and just like everyone else, he wasn't perfect. His job often took him into the homes of many strangers, and eventually in June of 1980, he wound up at the home of 22-year-old nurse trainee Rose Burkert. After the chance meeting, Roger and Rose began an affair. The affair lasted throughout the summer of 1980. On September 8, 1980, Roger, accompanied by 6 of his co-workers, headed to Cahokia, Missouri, 200 miles east of his hometown, where they had a large job scheduled, and it would keep them away from home for 2 weeks. Marcella planned to keep herself busy with a long-term babysitting job while Roger was away. After Roger had been with his work crew in Cahokia for 2 days, Rose Burkert made the 3.5-hour trip to meet Roger. When she arrived, the pair jumped into Rose's blue 1977 Chevy Malibu and decided to drive 125 miles north to Williamsburg, Iowa, where they would get a hotel room. But their secret tryst was an ill-fated one. It's not known just why the couple chose Williamsburg, Iowa as their destination. But when they arrived at the Amana Holiday Inn off of I-80, they were greeted with bad news. The hotel didn't have any vacancies due to a mortician's convention going on. As the hotel staff checked one more time before turning the couple away, they saw that there had been a last-second cancellation, and there was one hotel room left, room 260. It was a secluded room in the innermost part of the hotel. It was only accessible from inside the building. The last-second cancellation seemed to Roger and Rose as a stroke of good luck, and the fact they were assigned to the most private room in the hotel seemed like a bonus. They were hundreds of miles away from home, and it seemed like their secret affair would remain secret. At 7:40 p.m., the couple officially checked in and headed for their room. The next day at around 1 p.m., a housekeeper was moving from room to room making her rounds. She noticed that the guest in room 260 hadn't checked out by checkout time. She knocked on the door and didn't get a reply. Using a passkey, she let herself in. As she stepped into the room, she looked over towards the bed and saw 2 pairs of feet poking out from under the blanket. At first, she thought that the guests were asleep. She called out to them, and as she walked closer, she saw blood all over the bed and walls. Horrified, she raced from the room screaming and ran to get help. Police were called and arrived to find Roger Atkison and Rose Burkert dead in the hotel's bed. Roger was wearing only underwear, and Rose was almost fully clothed. Both had been struck savagely and repeatedly with a heavy, hatchet-like object. Roger apparently had raised his hands to the back of his head to prevent the blows from landing on his skull, and several of his fingers were severed. Strange clues were noticed by police, including soap ground into the carpet, toothpaste squirted into the bathtub, and a partially written message on a mirror. After the couple was officially identified, the Iowa County Sheriff's Department reached out to police in Roger's hometown of St. Joseph, Missouri, to make inquiries. From there, the St. Joseph police was tasked with tracking down Roger's wife, Marcella, to break the news to her. When they located her and told her that her husband was found dead in a hotel in Iowa, she thought they had made a mistake. Her husband was supposed to be in Cahokia, Missouri, but police assured Marcella that it wasn't a mistake. And if the news wasn't shocking enough, they also had to inform Marcella that her husband was found dead next to another woman. Marcella was devastated by the news. Police began investigating the case as possibly being a crime of passion or jealousy. The many violent blows with a weapon, the brutality, the fact that the couple was having an affair, it all looked to police like it had to be a crime of passion. And as Roger's wife, they had to question her to make sure she hadn't killed the couple in a fit of rage after finding out about the affair. But Marcella had been babysitting hundreds of miles away during the time when the murders occurred. She would later be questioned by police and given and pass a lie detector test. Marcella was ruled out as a suspect. Police also dug into Rose Burkhart's past, and when they did, a promising suspect emerged. An ex-boyfriend had allegedly threatened Rose. In fact, she told police that if anything ever happened to her, that this ex-boyfriend needed to be looked at closely. Police ran with that and seemed to lock in on him. But he had an airtight alibi and was at work when the murders occurred, and had a time card and eyewitnesses to prove it. The police were left to wonder if somehow, someone that was jealous or angry with Roger and Rose found them in the Amana Holiday Inn, hundreds of miles from home, and killed them. But they also had to consider the possibility that the couple somehow crossed paths with a disturbed maniac during their travel to the hotel. And a hotel that was filled to capacity left no shortage of possible suspects, the Morticians' Convention being an eerie backdrop to the story. Almost 4 decades later, the case remains unsolved, but there are clues, and possibly DNA that was left behind by the killer. Hopefully, that will lead to the identity of the true killer or killers in this case. As painful as it was to find out that her husband was murdered alongside his mistress, Marcella hasn't stopped trying to see Roger's case solved. She's given interviews to newspapers and is in the process of writing a book about the murders. Marcella joined me to discuss Roger's brutal and bizarre murder. That conversation is next, after a word from our sponsor. Hi, Marcella. Thanks for being with us to discuss your late husband Roger's case with us.
Hi, Mike. I appreciate you having me on the show and trying to have other people try to understand what a person goes through when they have a murder in their family. So thank you.
You're welcome. And we just covered your husband's case in depth on my other podcast, Criminology, which focuses on the facts and details of the case. On this podcast, The Murder of My Family, we focus a bit more on the victim and the family and the aftermath. So our discussion with you is a little bit more in depth for this podcast. So I really look forward to talking with you. And I noticed, we've been talking quite a bit and exchanging messages and talking on the phone. This is bringing a little bit more awareness to the case. And I guess some of the good things that have started off are that you're getting some attention from local media and news outlets. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I originally went to our local news press to hopefully get you some coverage about your programs that we're going to air about this case, and also to get the case some more attention too. So I went to the news press and got to interview with a reporter, and I thought it was just going to be like a newspaper article, but she did a live interview and they put it on the TV, our local station, and I think it ran for 2 nights about her interviewing me and that sort of thing. So that's a positive thing. And then I had a former investigative journalist contact me and wanted to talk to me about the case, and I sat down and talked with him for a couple of hours, and he has some connections in town with law enforcement and people like that are retired. I don't know if they're all retired, but he has a lot of connections since he was an investigative reporter for the news press at one time. So that's been encouraging because the guy's really interested in the case and just like everyone else thinks it ought to be solved.
And that's got to be a good feeling after 38 years of not really having much movement and much going on in the case. All of a sudden you're getting some attention for the case. Yes,
it is.
This is a really complex case, and there's a lot of pieces to it and mysterious aspects to it. But before we get into all that stuff, if you could just tell me a little bit about your husband, Roger, a little bit about his background, who he was and what kind of person he was. Well,
I first originally met Roger at what you called our youth fellowship at church, and was a member of that group. And, you'd do activities together and get acquainted with each other. And so that's originally where I met him, was in that group at church. And he was very well liked by everyone in the group. As a matter of fact, I think he was our president, and he went on to get to be the associational president, I believe it was, or the more of the outside of the local church, more of a president of a bigger group. And he was very well liked, always had a smile on his face, a positive person, friendly, just kind of like a little puppy wagging their tail and licking your hand. He was always friendly with people. So he was well liked by the people that he came in contact with.
And in his career, what did he do for a living?
Well, at the time of his death, he was a repairman installer for General Telephone Company out of Savannah, Missouri.
And he used to travel for his job.
Well, he would work in the local area, but I don't know why they had come up with this work out of town, but the guys rotated on who went to work out of town, and it just happened that he was assigned to go to Cahokia, Missouri, the week of his death. So that wasn't a normal thing. That wasn't it happened quite often. That was, as a matter of fact, that's the first time that he had ever gone out of town and worked like that for that company.
Now, when he went to do that job and that took him away from home, you were doing a babysitting job of your own. Is that correct?
Yes, we had started a babysitting job. Kind of to back up, what we would do is we would just pack our clothes up, move into the people's house that we were babysitting for, and just act like we lived there. I would like mop floors, run the vacuum, do the dishes, cook for the kids, take them to appointments. So it was as if we lived there and those were our children, as long as we were babysitting them. Of course, he would go to his job during the day, but he would be there then of a night with us. And so that's what we were doing before he left to go work out of town.
And then one day when this tragedy all starts, this mystery starts, you get a phone call from someone. Tell us a little bit about that phone call.
Well, the girl that we had started the babysitting job with, she had older brothers that were in college, but they weren't interested in, taking care of their little sister and doing the housework and things like that. So that's why we got hired as the babysitters for that family. Anyway, the girl and I had been to Kansas City shopping all day because she was rather a tomboy, and her mom wanted her to have a dress for a wedding, and she thought maybe I'd be more successful helping her find a dress than she would, the mother. So we'd been gone to Kansas City shopping all day, and that's about an hour's drive from where we live. And then I hadn't been back very long from the shopping trip with, and I don't think she'd mind me saying her name, Lisa. And my mother called, and she said, well, what have you been doing? And I said, well, we've been shopping all day in Kansas City. And she said, well, why don't you and Lisa come over for a while and visit? Well, it was very unusual for my mother to ask me to come off of a babysitting job like that. So I was leery about, having an uneasy feeling about what's going on. And she was real insistent. And so I said, okay, we'll come over for just a little bit. So the thing that occurred in my mind is something has happened to my dad. That's what I thought. Something's happened to Dad, and she's needing me to come over there. So I had in my mind that there was a problem with my dad because he was a alcoholic and had a lot of episodes of problems with him. So that's what I thought. It was my dad. Something was wrong with my dad.
And then you go over to her house, and what happens?
Well, I saw these strange cars there, and more than just their car, and thinking, well, what's going on? There's cars here and I don't recognize them, and quite a few cars. And so when I got to the door of their house, just as we went in, my aunt, my mom's sister, was there, and she took Lisa out the door, right out the front door, right back out the front door. And my aunt knew her family, so it wasn't like this was a strange lady taking this girl and that she would be afraid to go with her. So my aunt escorts Lisa back out of the house, and I get in there in the living room, and here's my mom and my dad and these two strange men in suits. So then I'm processing in my mind quickly, okay, this isn't about my dad because there he is. So then it's like, why am I coming here, and why are these strange men here? So that was the scenario of first, when I first got there and what was happening.
So I guess the police had been trying to locate you, but since you were out, they got a hold of your parents, and your parents called you, your mom?
Yes. The neighbor lady said that they had been looking for me at my house, but I wasn't there. So I think she knew our family well enough to say, well, her parents' name is so-and-so. And so then they looked up my parents.
And then you were told that they had a body with an ID on it. Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't remember much of what was said before that, but they started out to tell me about what was going on by saying they had found a body with Roger's ID on it. And, my first response is, well, it's been stolen, it's not his. And I don't remember exactly the sequence, but it came out that this body was in Iowa. And I was real adamant about, no, that can't be Roger because he's in Cahokia, Missouri. He's not in Iowa. So it has to be stolen. Somebody's stolen his ID, and this body is somebody else. And so, they were then pretty adamant back to me that, no, we're pretty sure this is Roger and this is him. This is his body. And then before I could process that much, then they say, do you know a Rose Burkert or however you say it? And I said, no, who's Rose? What's that? What's that got to do with anything? And then they said, well, this Rose Burkert, her body had been found with Roger in a motel in Iowa. And so it's just mind boggling because he's not supposed to be in Iowa. I didn't know there was an affair going on, and now he's dead. So it just, and I don't remember much of what was said after that because I'm trying to process all this because I still didn't believe that it was him because I expected him to call any time. And I think I may have even made that comment to him. Well, he's going to be calling any time and tell me that this is all, that his ID was stolen. This is all a mistake, and he's in Missouri and he's fine.
So this was a lot of shocking news to handle all at once. Not only do you find out your husband's dead, but you find out that he was having an affair with another woman who was killed with him.
Yes.
How did you process that? How did you take that all in and deal with all that information?
Well, I think at the moment, at first it was denial. It can't be. This just can't be. So I was in denial for, I don't know how long, but I know it was for a time. Well, until I guess his brother went to identify the body. I believe it was on Sunday. So that had to be, but still, it's like, I don't understand, this just doesn't make sense. So I just think a lot of it was, I just went numb and I just wasn't processing the whole thing because I thought this can't be true. So
when police start looking and digging, they suspect that this is a crime of jealousy, that somebody was upset with the couple for, and killed them as a result. And when this happens, they always look at the people closest to the victims and the spouses of the victims. And I know that they questioned you and asked you about where you were and did you know anything about it? And how did that feel to sort of be suspected at first because they thought you might be jealous of an affair and you might have done this?
Well, I knew that it wasn't me, so it wasn't a big weight on me as far as them thinking it was me, because I knew where I was at. I knew I had people that could say where I was at the time. I couldn't have done it. So it didn't really affect me a whole lot then. I just willingly cooperated with them. I told them everything I could think of, everything I knew. They did question me. I took a lie detector test. I was fingerprinted. I gave a deposition. So anything they asked me to do, I did, because I had nothing to hide. So, but I still, it's just kind of like your mind, when you can't process it. I guess it just wasn't bothering me a whole lot as far as that, because I just knew that it wasn't me. And so, my focus was on, well, who could have done it?
We'll get into a little bit as far as details of the case, because it's on one hand, it seems like it could be a case of jealousy, but on the other hand, there's some circumstances that make it seem like that it would be hard for somebody that knew them to be jealous of them, to be so far from home away with them. So it makes you wonder if they ran into some stranger or some maniac someplace that just isn't connected, and it just seems like it's a case of jealousy. And again, this is a really big mystery. The whole case is surrounded with a lot of different things, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go on about that. But did you know of anyone that would want to do Roger harm, or might have wanted to hurt him? Anybody that he had trouble with previously?
No, I say he was always a friendly, smiling guy, never met a stranger. I don't know of anyone that he had come across that he had made an enemy of, as far as now I'm concerned. Now, look at, if you think of, did she have a jealous boyfriend, then that's a whole nother scenario. But as far as our side, no, I don't know of anyone that he had arguments with or was not getting along with.
And I know this whole case wound up causing you to have suspicions about people in your life, family members of yours. I know you had some unpleasant thoughts that somehow your father could be involved, or your uncle even, perhaps. Tell us a little about your father and your uncle. What made you think of them?
Well, my dad acted a little strange after we were told about it. And people, I think, act strange in situations like this because it's such a shock. One time somebody said to me, well, you didn't act normal about this whole thing. Well, what's normal when you've been told that your husband's dead and he's somewhere where you had no idea he was going, and he's with someone else that you didn't know about. So I don't know what's normal for that. When I was in denial, I think that's normal because I had faith in my husband. So anyway, when we went to go view Roger's body for the first time, my dad said, now don't cry. And I thought, wow, that's a really weird request, because I should be expected to cry, but I didn't. He instructed me not to cry, so I didn't. And I don't know if I even cried during the funeral. I don't remember that. But that I just always wondered, why did he tell me that? And I don't know. I never asked him why. I never asked for an explanation. So I just thought that was odd, something like that.
So it was more his words and the way that he said that stuff to you afterwards that just gave you an odd feeling?
Yes.
And then tell us a little bit about your uncle, his background, what made you think that it possibly could be him?
Well, my uncle, my dad's brother, Charles, was a known serial killer. And he'd been in and out of prison, in and out of mental hospitals, pretty much all of his life. And the last time that I remember seeing him was at my grandma's funeral, and I was about 10, 11, 12 years old. And the reason I remember that stuck out so vivid in my mind is because he was handcuffed, and I guess it just kind of, the idea ran across my mind how sad it is to be at your mother's funeral and you're handcuffed. And that is the last time that I remember ever seeing the man or having any contact with him. And I don't know at the time if I even had any contact as far as speaking with him. So he has this terrible record of killing usually young men or small children, but usually it was young men. And he also was a pedophile. And unfortunately, he had come back sometime. I don't know if he came back many times, but we know that he came back at least twice. And he killed a little 4-year-old boy who was the child of a prominent man in town. And and he did that in our hometown. That's just frustrating that he did it in my hometown where I grew up and in an area where he grew up. And then he also took a 11-year-old girl, I think it was, and killed her. And so that's at least 2 murders that he did in our area. And when he was arrested, I believe it was for the girl's murder, he was fainting craziness, I guess, because he wouldn't talk. They would ask him questions, and for a year the man didn't talk to the law enforcement people. And when they finally found out that he was claiming to be Richard Clark, and when they finally found out he was Charles Hatcher, that came out in the paper, and then it was like, oh my gosh, he's in this area. So I called the St. Joseph detectives or police. I made a call down there, and I said, would you interview Charles Hatcher, because he is an uncle, and could you see if he possibly had anything to do with Roger and Rose's death? And so that's when they interviewed him and said that he denied it. He admitted a lot of the things he did, but he said he didn't have anything to do with that. And it really wasn't his, a couple like that wasn't his style of the type of murders he did. Their age, they were older than what he usually killed. And, a lot of his, most of his, if not all, were homosexually motivated. And there was no evidence that Roger had been sexually molested.
So the type of victims he normally picked weren't adult couples. They were younger, more vulnerable, single victims.
Yes, and like younger single men.
Yeah. And so, and just to clarify for people that are listening, this happened in a hotel in Iowa that was, I'm guessing, 200 miles or more from your hometown. So if this was a case of someone being jealous and wanting to follow Roger and Rose and do them harm because they were upset about something or jealous of them, they would have had to have followed them for quite a ways. I mean, 200 miles, you're talking, depending on what speed you're driving, you're talking 3-4 hours driving just to follow them if it was someone that knew them. So it does make you wonder if they just ran into a disturbed person someplace and it just looked like a crime of passion. I know some of the details that you've learned and that have been in the newspapers were pretty interesting. It was a mortician's convention going on there. And there was a last second cancellation. That's the only way they were able to get a room. And the room that they got was a inside room that was the most secluded, it seemed. But then if they're there for privacy, there's no sign of forced entry, which means it seems that they let the person into their room. So it's kind of interesting to think about that, because if they're there trying to stay away from people they know, trying to be private, why would they let anyone come into the room with them? So I don't know what your take was on that, what you thought about that.
Well, there were a couple of factors that, Mike, I've thought about this for 38 years. So, and it's weighed on my mind heavily and more so sometimes than others. But there's a couple of things that a person would had to have known. And let me back up by saying, I don't think it was a random thing. They said it was so vicious and so gruesome and so horrible that it just more than likely had to have been a personal thing. Somebody had a personal vendetta. So I don't believe somebody walked off of Interstate 80 and went in and thought, oh, I'm going to get these people in room 260. I don't think, that's everything. Anything's possible, but I don't think that. So then when you think, all right, the person or persons that did it had to have known where they were at the week before they were killed, because he was in Cahokia, not St. Joseph, Missouri. And then they would had to have known where they were going or followed them to Williamsburg, Iowa, to the motel where they were at. Now, they apparently didn't even know where they were going for sure. I mean, as far as we're going to go to the Holiday Inn in the Manna Colonies, they apparently didn't know that for a fact themselves because they got the room that was canceled at the last minute. So it wasn't like they had called ahead and made reservations and they knew for sure where they were going to be. Now, I understand there was only 2 motels in that area at the time. So if you followed somebody and kind of got lost following them, it probably wouldn't be hard to find the car in one of the 2 motel parking lots. Now, as far as, and I kind of trying not to ramble, but, and then, okay, let's say they were followed. Well, how did they know what room they were in? Well, I understand that when Roger and Rose first got there at the motel, they parked in the back in a handicapped parking spot. Well, then I don't think they were in the room too awfully long until they were asked to move out of the handicapped parking spot. So theorize then that apparently it appears that she went down to move the car. Number one, it was her car. And number two, when she was killed, she was fully dressed except for her shoes and socks. So it's thought that she went down to move the car. And if they'd been followed, then somebody could have followed her back to the room and maybe went ahead and pushed their way through when she went in. Or could she have not locked the door? Did she forget to lock the door and then they came on in later? I don't know. Those are just things that I've thought about that could be possibilities.
Yeah, and some of the bizarre things about the case, obviously the way they were murdered, not many people are murdered in that manner. It's very unusual. And then there was evidence that someone sat next to them in chairs, pulled the chairs up alongside the bed, and maybe sat down and talked to them. And then you've got some partial message scrawled on the wall or on the mirror, whatever it was. It's just some very odd clues. And that part to me doesn't seem if someone was there and it was a crime of passion, they were jealous, they would have went in and just started attacking right away. In my mind anyways, but those are just some of the clues that just make it such a perplexing mystery, and there's no rhyme or reason to what happened. And it's sort of, I think this is one reason the police have had a hard time all these years, because, there's so many different possibilities. And I know you've done a lot of reading and research, and that's led you to start planning on writing a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've had some people tell me you ought to write a book, and just kind of put that off because I don't see myself as an author, although I've always wanted to write a book about something, but certainly not this. But I had this lady and this man tell me after they knew my story that they said back in April, they said, you need to write a book. And so I felt then that was God telling me I need to write a book. But I don't feel like I have a lot of skills in being a great writer, but I thought, well, I'll just tell it as it is. I think I'm a pretty simple person. I think some pretty simple language. Being a school teacher helped me with my English skills. So I thought, okay, I'll write a book. And the focus that I want people to know about the murder because that's interesting. That is such an interesting case. But I'd like for people and also I don't just talk about the murder. I talk about there's several things in my life that have come, that I've met, obstacles I've run up against that God has seen me through those. And some of it could just simply only be miracles from God. So I want people to know that when they meet an obstacle, like the death of a spouse or the murder of a spouse or having a hard time having a child through infertility, a lot of those things that God can see them through that, and God saw me through those things. When Roger was first killed, I needed so desperately for somebody to come to me and say, I've been through something like this, maybe not a murder of their spouse, but I've been through the death of a spouse, and I've made it. Look, I'm still here. I made it. God saw me through it. So I just needed desperately for somebody to tell me, you will make it. You know, it's not going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't easy, but you will make it, and God will see you through that. And I would hope that would be the message that people would get, that there is hope and God will see you through it. Now, that's not to say you're not going to hurt. That's not going to say that it's going to be happy days ahead, but he will see you through it. So the purpose is to inspire people to keep on keeping on, to let them know about the murder, and hopefully somebody maybe knows something out there that they would come forward and give us the information, that piece of the puzzle that's missing that would solve this thing. And then the third thing is just to kind of tell about some of my life. So that's it.
So you're going to combine all that into a book, and sort of it'll touch on a lot of different aspects.
Yes. But the main focus is probably going to be each chapter hopefully points towards the murder.
And it'll be an interesting read, and I hope you do write it and publish it, because I for one would definitely be interested in reading it. And where does, before we leave, I just want to ask you, where does the investigation stand now? Are the police actively talking to you and keeping you updated about what's going on or what they're doing?
Well, the last time that the sheriff was in St. Joseph and questioning people, and I assuming taking DNA from people because they took DNA from me, that was in, I believe it was December of 2017. And the sheriff told me that they were coming back in 2018, sometime in October, November, December, but to my knowledge, they haven't been back. Usually they do contact me and tell me they're in town. So the last I knew, they were still interviewing people and taking DNA samples. But when I've called and said, and asked them, okay, have you got any results from the DNA? It's just denied that they've been able to come up with anything. But I don't know if I'm getting the full story or not, because they'll ask a lot of questions, but they tell you very little.
Yeah, and sometimes that can seem troublesome to a lot of people that I talk to. They feel like they're not getting the full story. And understandably, the police have to hold some information back and keep the investigation going on without releasing too much. So sometimes that's justified, but I know it can be frustrating for a lot of the people that I talk to that don't get updates or don't feel the police are working on the case to the best of their abilities. But let's hope they are. And if you're mentioning that they had asking you for DNA, then that means they may have some DNA from the suspect or the killer, and that may one day lead to an arrest. We can hope for that. If anybody out there listening has information about the case, who can they contact? Who would you recommend that they reach out to talk to about what information they have?
Well, I understand that the case has been pretty much totally turned over to the sheriff in Marengo, Iowa, because that's the county. He's the Iowa County Sheriff. So his name is Robert Rotter, Rotter, and he is the Iowa County Sheriff. That's in Marengo, Iowa. And his phone number is 319-642-7307. But if people want to tell them something and don't want to be talking to him, his email address is all lowercase, RROTTER at Iowa, and this is all lowercase, IowaCountySheriff.org. So that's IOWACOSHERIFF.org. O-R-G. And I'm sure they would be welcoming any, if you even think it's the slightest little thing, one little thing might be the answer to the puzzle.
And hopefully if anybody out there listening does have any information, they will come forward. But again, I definitely can't thank you enough for coming on to talk about this case. It's, obviously it's a difficult one with a lot of personal stuff you've opened up about, and, I appreciate it. And I hope that gives the listeners a good insight on what happened and where the case went to and where it is now.
Well, like I said, I really appreciate you being interested in the case, Mike, and doing this, because there just might be someone out there that will respond and help us get this solved.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. Today's case has been a really baffling and bizarre one, and we barely scratched the surface. If you'd like a very detailed and in-depth episode about this case, be sure to check out episode 51 of my other podcast, Criminology. We dove headfirst into this case and included a very informative interview with Iowa County Sheriff Rob Rotter, who walked us through the crime scene, clues, and suspects. If this episode has sparked your interest, episode 51 of Criminology likely will as well, so be sure to check it out. And if you did enjoy this episode, please introduce a friend of the podcast and invite them to listen. We'll see you back in 2 weeks. And before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.